Hey guys, Troy here. We've got a really brief video for you today. We're just going to talk about what is ERISA and what are our fiduciary responsibilities under ERISA. So you probably know what ERISA is. It's a term that we throw out a lot, but I want to make sure that you have some context for what exactly is ERISA. So the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974 is what the acronym actually stands for. Sometimes it's referred to as the Employee Retirement Income Act of 1974 as amended because it's been changed a lot. But what is it? I've heard people say that it's the body of law that created 401ks, which is not true. I've heard people say that it's like a government agency, which is not true. It's just a big body of law. It actually did not create the 401k, it codified fiduciary laws. So, what does it mean to be a fiduciary? That's a really, really good question. Um, every attorney would agree with this. The highest form of law in the land is fiduciary law. Fiduciary just means that you're handling someone else's affairs. You're handling someone else's resources or money or benefits. And so it's a really, really big deal. There is no higher responsibility or legal liability than being a fiduciary. Think of it this way. Let's say you have 100 people there at your company, but you have a conference room and the conference table in that room only seats like 10 or 12 people. You're not going to fit all 100 people in the room when you're trying to decide who should your record keeper be, what investment should you have in the plan. You're making those decisions on behalf of the company. It's not a small responsibility. You're having to do so acting in what is the best interest of plan participants. It's a really big deal. The Internal Revenue Code for Section 401k is actually what created the 401k plan. So the Internal Revenue Code, the US tax code has lots and lots of parts to it, right? But you go down to section 401 and you go 401A, B, C, D, you go all the way down to section 401k, and there's a provision in there that allows employees to defer resources in a employer plan to be taxed at a later time. I'm shortening it or abbreviating it, but basically that's what the loophole in this tax code allows for. And it was there in the tax code for a while before anybody actually used it, and nobody really understood what it was. And then somebody stumbled across it and said this could be a really great thing. Although I believe the person that was doing it at that time, back in 1978 or so, was having difficulty getting very many people to kind of buy into this. And so it was actually the Revenue Act of 1978 that gave some safe harbors and guidelines that really propelled forward the 401k industry. It is kind of crazy to think about, but an entire industry was built on this whole idea of ERISA law. Okay. So, also, I thought this was interesting, but when I was visiting recently with the Assistant Secretary of Labor in Washington, D.C., he was telling me that when they were first discussing these ideas of 401ks back in the late 70s, that they thought that it would be a fairly minimal cost, a fairly minimal impact. Every time a body of law moves through Congress, it has to be marked up and a price tag has to be attached to it in terms of how much is this going to actually cost taxpayers. They completely underestimated that so many Americans would be involved in these 401ks. They had no idea. They thought that the tax implication of how much was going to be deferred in taxes and things like that was going to be very, very minimal, which is interesting now in retrospect because an entire industry has been built around this idea of 401ks. So what does ERISA tell us to do? Well, it tells us to do a lot of things, but it does kind of summarize a lot of your guidance right here. It says that you should discharge your fiduciary duties solely in the interest of plan participants for the exclusive purpose of providing benefits to those employees as a prudent person would, diversifying the investments following the plan document. What does that mean? Well, as a plan fiduciary, you have fiduciary duties. You are told that you should discharge those fiduciary duties as a prudent person would. A prudent person who understands at least a little bit about what a big deal this is would say, I'm not an expert in this. It'd be like if I tried to fix my car and take my engine apart. That would be a train wreck. It would be worth it for me to discharge or pay a mechanic, someone else to do that for me. If I was building a home, I wouldn't tell the builder, "Hey, I'm gonna save some money here by doing the plumbing and electricity myself." That'd be a really, really dumb idea. It might save me a little bit in the short term, but not so much when the house floods or burns down because of bad electrical wiring. So we are told that we should act as a prudent person would, acting in like circumstances with their own money. What would they do? And we have to do what's solely in the interest of plan participants, and we have to follow the exclusive purpose or exclusive benefits rule, which is why it would be a prohibition to do something that benefits the company but not the plan employees. Like having a preferential line of credit with the local bank because you're having them handle your 401k. Those kind of things are violations of the exclusive benefits rule. So, how do we discharge or delegate fiduciary responsibility? There's a variety of ways to do so. We're just going to summarize the five biggest ones. So, under ERISA Code Section 316 is something called a plan administrator. You're the plan administrator. You have the responsibility to be an administrator, but you have the ability under ERISA 316 to delegate that administrative responsibility and, more importantly, the liability for that administrative responsibility to what's called administrative fiduciary. That's a big deal. You also have the ability under ERISA Code Section 402A to name somebody else as the plan fiduciary other than yourself. You also have the ability under Code Section 404C to protect yourself. It's a safe harbor to protect yourself from investment choices. So we have a responsibility as plan fiduciaries to offer a diversified lineup for employees. But after offering a diversified lineup so that any employee might reasonably diversify their investments between large and small, between international and domestic, between bonds and stocks, we give them the ability to diversify their investments. But then we tell them under Code Section 404C, it's your choice to choose which investments that you'd like to choose, that you'd like to have in the plan. The investment policy statement should absolutely give us some protection on the Code Section 404C. You also have the ability under ERISA, Code Section 4 or 321, to discharge to an investment advisor who's also a co-fiduciary with the plan, or ERISA 338 to an investment manager who's actually like the investment fiduciary for the plan. These are ways in which you can discharge or delegate fiduciary duties. So, do you have any questions about this? Any other ways that you've thought of to try to discharge some responsibility, or any questions that you might have about discharging responsibility, which is part of your fiduciary responsibility as a plan fiduciary? Let me know if you have questions, and I'd be happy to tackle those in a subsequent video. All right. Thanks, guys.